Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating and frankly sobering piece of geopolitical analysis from Dawn's Zahid Hussain. We're looking at the May 2026 U.S.-Iran conflict. And we're not just talking about battlefield tactics here. We're diving deep into the massive economic shockwaves and the global fallout of what Hussain calls an asymmetrical war. Let's get right into it and see exactly what's unfolding.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. We've got four main chapters. 1. Echoes of past conflicts. 2. The asymmetrical battlefield. 3. The economic shockwave. And finally, Chapter 4, political and global fallout. Starting right off with Section 1, Echoes of past conflicts and the historical parallels to our current crisis. To really understand what's happening right now, we have to look back at America's historical track record. The article actually anchors us with this incredible 2012 observation by former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. Think about it. From Vietnam to Iraq and absolutely in Afghanistan, which, let's not forget, ended in that highly publicized withdrawal just 5 years before this current crisis. The U.S. has just repeatedly found itself bogged down in these prolonged conflicts without a viable exit plan. It's really setting the stage for this idea that history is, once again, repeating itself. And Hussain draws this direct, really striking parallel between the justifications used to start these wars. Just like the 2003 Iraq invasion was kicked off under false pretenses about weapons of mass destruction, the author argues that this 2026 Iran conflict was sparked by a highly exaggerated narrative about Iran's nuclear program. So the key takeaway here, it's the assertion that the public was misled in both cases, dragging the U.S. into yet another war with zero clear path to an actual victory. Moving on to Section 2. The asymmetrical battlefield, and how this is redefining modern warfare. So what exactly do we mean by an asymmetrical war? Well, think of it as a modern-day David versus Goliath scenario. It's a conflict where you have a massive, glaring imbalance in traditional military power. So what does the underdog do? They have to use alternative tactics. They exploit the specific vulnerabilities of this much larger, incredibly expensive military machine. It's absolutely not about matching fighter jet for fighter jet. It's all about maximizing disruption with minimal resources. And as the article points out, that is exactly how Iran is countering the combined forces of the U.S. and Israel. To really grasp how this works in practice, just think about this number, $35,000. I mean, that's roughly the price of a mid-sized sedan. But in this context, it's the incredibly low production cost of Iran's primary retaliatory weapon, these mass-produced weaponized drones. When you look at the grand scheme of global military budgets, 35 grand is literally pocket change. But then look at the stark contrast here, $25 billion. According to the data cited, that is the staggering financial hit the U.S. has already taken. The U.S. is literally forced to use these insanely expensive, highly sophisticated defense systems just to shoot down those pocket change drones. And in the process, the rapidly depleting missile stockpiles that take years and billions of dollars to rebuild. This one comparison perfectly captures the pure financial drain of fighting an asymmetrical war. And Iran is leaning hard into these unconventional tactics. They're mass-producing those cheap drones totally uninterrupted, even with heavy U.S. and Israeli bombings. They are effectively choking the Strait of Hormuz, which we all know is a massive, vital global shipping artery, by firing at oil tankers, even when those tankers are actively escorted by U.S. naval forces. And here's a huge point for the modern age. They're targeting American tech data centers. It's a very calculated strategy. The goal is to cripple the digital infrastructure we rely on every single day, causing maximum economic damage without ever needing to field a massive conventional army. Which brings us right into Section 3, the economic shockwave. We're looking at the financial costs and some surprising windfalls. Because of that disruption in the Strait of Hormuz, the impact has been absolutely brutal and immediate. Look at this. U.S. crude oil rates practically doubled in a single month. We're talking skyrocketing from $65 straight up to over $110 a barrel. And you know what that means? It translates directly to serious pain at the pump for everyday consumers. It drives up the cost of shipping, groceries, travel. It's essentially paralyzing whole sectors of the global economy. But here is where we get a really surprising juxtaposition. While everyday consumers are suffering, certain sectors are experiencing an absolute boom. The article points out a projected windfall of over $60 billion for U.S. oil producers if these high crude prices stick around. It's a pretty stark reminder that war, especially one that throws global energy supplies into chaos, invariably creates massive financial winners right alongside the losers. And it is definitely not just the energy sector. The military-industrial complex is cashing in big time too.
The text notes that the Trump administration recently greenlit an $8.5 billion arms sale to Middle Eastern allies. The reasoning? To compensate for the losses those specific allies suffered from Iranian attacks. So while this war is rapidly draining the public military budget, it's simultaneously generating a river of revenue for private American arms manufacturers who are stepping in to supply the region.
Let's move to our final chapter, Section 4, Political and Global Fallout. We're focusing on isolation and domestic scrutiny.
An entire nation is being humiliated by the Iranian leadership. That is a direct quote from German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, and it highlights a massive, seismic global shift. According to the analysis, America has rarely been this isolated. Key Western allies are largely just refusing to join what many of them consider an illegal conflict. This war is exposing some severe, widening cracks in the America-led world order, and those cracks might not be easily repaired. And then you look domestically, and the situation is basically a crisis of confidence. The article cites a Washington Post ABC News Ipsos poll showing a full 59% of respondents believe President Trump lacks the mental sharpness to lead, with a corresponding 55% calling him outright unfit to serve. It's a really stark look at the deep, deep unpopularity Washington is facing at home while trying to manage this incredibly complex war abroad. Yet, despite those polling numbers and the severe economic fallout we just talked about, the administration has repeatedly threatened to escalate things even further by deploying ground forces to Iran. The author argues that acting on this threat would be a massive blunder. It risks a military humiliation far greater than Vietnam or Afghanistan, and it creates a dangerous political trap for an already embattled administration. So we have a superpower bogged down by a much smaller adversary, heavily isolated from its traditional allies and facing immense domestic stress. The ultimate question this analysis leaves us with is all about permanent geopolitical damage. Can the traditional America-led world order actually survive now that the absolute limits of its military might have been so starkly exposed? It's a really sobering question to ponder. Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the world around you.